Thank you, Chair. The meeting is now on YouTube. I will just, before formally handing over, just check if there are any other attendees waiting to come in at the moment. There are not. Madam Chair, before handing formally back to you, just to remind I'm getting a bit of feedback, Madam Chair. I don't know if anybody else is. I will just say again that we are reconvening this meeting. So the application obviously is the next item on the agenda. I should point out that we have at least one new councillor who has joined us for this item.
We've got two. And we've got three. Hello, Paul.
Hi there.
Right, shall I start then, Paul? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for managing to get on Zoom. As you can see, we've had one or two problems of people have flitted in and flitted out. The people who are about to speak will be invited to speak, and we'll have 3 minutes each. And if you wish to ask a question, can I ask you to use the blue hand, councillors and officers? That will help enormously. Thank you. So we now go to the planning application 18/0081/7/out, the development of land for employment use, classes B1, B2 and B8, together with ancillary parking, highway infrastructure, engineering works, etc. at Cowthick Plantation, Stamford Road, Stanley.
It has been linked on YouTube.
Sorry? It has been, yes, thank you.
Oh, it has been announced that it's on YouTube.
Oh. Paul, I can only see 3 of us. 4 of us. Paul. I've lost the screen for everybody. Can't hear you, Paul. You're muted.
Chair, we have on our screen the development control, the 23rd. We've got the presentation up at the moment, but I can.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I'm having some trouble with feedback. However, you don't need to see everybody at the moment because the planning officers will go through the presentation slides.
Thank you. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this is an application for planning reference 18/00817/OUT. The development of land for employment use class B1, B2 and B8, together with ancillary parking, highway infrastructure, engineering works, landscaping and ancillary works, all matters reserved at Cowthick Plantation, Stamford Road, Stanion, Northamptonshire. Madam Chair, I'd like to hand over firstly for a brief introduction to my colleague, Ian Smith. And then it will be followed on by a presentation by Fajana Mazunda, and then myself, Edward Oteng. So if I can hand over now to Ian, Madam Chair, be most grateful.
Thank you. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair, members of the committee and members of the public participating via Zoom and viewing online. So, as has been indicated, this is an outline planning permission for the development of land for employment use classes B1 to B2 and B8, together with ancillary parking, highway infrastructure, engineering works, landscaping and ancillary works, with all matters reserved. Can we move a slide, please? Thank you. So this slide is intended to inform members about what's updated since the original main report was drafted. There's been 2 addenda report produced since the original report, dealing with further representations received since the main report. So I'm just briefly going to take you through those addendas, and then we're going to deal, when we get to the end of those, with the late representations received. So in terms of addenda 1, that was intended to deal with issues in relation to an update on transport issues relating to the removal of Highways England's previous concerns, elaboration on paragraph 8.63 of the officer's report regards the monitor and manage approach to highways impacts, an amendment to condition 40 to reflect a slight amendment to the time limit for submission of reserved matters to 3 years, an update and correction to references to town and country planning legislation in the original officer's report, and legal reference being made with respect to virtual planning committees being held. So that's the coverage of addenda 1, Chair and members. In relation to addenda 2, a list of further representations that were received since addenda 1 were included, which numbered 20 in total. They covered some key themes, including legality of virtual committees, and references to the town and country planning legislation in the original report, ENC's, i.e. Northamptonshire District Council's objections to the development, which included the East Northants Committee report and letter, then being appended to the addenda in full, the North Northants Joint Policy Unit policy comments, which were appended to addenda 2 in full, in addition to the commentary that was provided in the officer's report at paragraph 5.48. There was additional information provided from the applicant on job creation and economic benefit of the development. There was a solicitor's letter from Hewitson's withdrawing Great Oakley Farms landowner objection to the scheme. Additional information on road traffic accident history, traffic impacts with respect to the approach taken to the manager and monitor, and how that was secured by conditions 17 to 24 in the officer report, and referred to in the officer report paragraphs 5.91 to 5.118, etc. There were also reference to air quality and noise and vibration, which are also dealt with in the officer's report, and conformance with the development plan, and particularly issues around conditions related to policy 3, landscape character, policy 19, delivery of green infrastructure, policy 23, distribution of new jobs, policy 24, logistics, the section 106 agreement in relation to the heads of terms, which was set out in more detail than from the original report, and an updated recommendation to reflect the updates in addendas reports 1 and 2, including the section 106 heads of terms. So just to summarise in relation to addenda 1 and 2, those basically all of those issues were covered in terms of the representations up to and including the last committee date that was adjourned as of last week. So subsequently to that, there have been a number of other late representations received since the committee was adjourned last week. And I just briefly now want to take you through those. So the further representations and the summary of those since that have been received since 5:30 on the 29th of June. There was a representation from Little Stanion Parish Council dated the 17th of June, requesting to postpone and highlighting the defect in the parish notification. There was an objection and representation from Islip Parish Council relating to traffic modelling and concerns about failure to consider traffic and in relation to, and in particular, issues to do with junction 12 of the A14. There was a letter from Tom Pursglove that was copied to CBC, the County Council, etc., relating to issues to do with carbon emissions and adverse impacts in relation to green infrastructure and issues relating to Southwick Plantation. There was a representation from East Northamptonshire Council and Dean Wishart relating to an inadequate summary of ENC objections, which I've previously dealt with and advised has been picked up in Addendum Report 2. There was a representation from a Mr. Toller to Northamptonshire County Council, which Corby Borough Council were copied in on, relating to concerns about the withdrawal of the objection that was made by Highways England, issues around enforceability of planning conditions, correlations between road repair needs and increased use of roads by HGVs, and concerns about suitability of the A6116 as a primary route. There was also a representation from Mrs. Toller regarding and requesting an MP intervention with respect to the range and magnitude of public concern related to the application, and a further representation from Mr. Toller, which was emailed to all members earlier today, highlighting concerns raised by the local plan officer not being supported by policy, the ecology officer, and a request to withdraw the Northants Joint Policy Unit around landscaping and more details of conditions, Anglian water and concerns regards to flooding, failure to properly consider issues raised by East Northamptonshire District Council and the parish councils, and concerns about assumptions being made about traffic and noise generation, disproportionate weight attributed to economic benefits, concerns about monitoring and managing conditions, and concerns about deferral of details to reserve matters stage, and a request to refuse the application or defer consideration. Madam Chair and members of the committee, these representations, whilst long in length, do reflect the totality of all the representations received since the original report was drafted. And in the main, they relate to highways and transport, ecology and green infrastructure and environmental impacts, which have been the main theme of previous representations received. All of these principal areas of concern will be picked up in the officer's presentation and are referred to in the officer's report, including Addenda 1 and 2, and where necessary and appropriate are suitably conditioned and or included within the draft section 106 heads of terms. I should say, Madam Chair, members of the committee, there was also a representation from Councillor Rutt in relation to impacts on transport and highways, ecology and concerns regards virtual committees and impacts on representation. So, Madam Chair and members of the committee, if I may, if we could now move on a slide, please. So as indicated originally, this is an outline application. So the application is in outline only. So Corby Borough Council, as the local planning authority, are only being asked to consider the general principle of development at this location for the intended B1 to B8 uses as set out in the application. We'll just go back a slide, please. So if outline permission was to be granted in respect of this application, it would be granted subject to detailed conditions as set out in the report, and of which there are 47 in total, and would require the subsequent approval of reserved matters, which will require the consideration of further detailed submissions relating to issues such as highways and transport, landscaping and ecology, flood risk and surface water drainage, noise and lighting, and sustainability and energy. The proposed development will be located to the east of Corby, adjacent to the existing Southwick Plantation, as per the location plan that you can see on screen. The Southwick Plantation will be retained and not developed as part of the proposal. The proposal is significant in its size. It will cover over 200 acres and generate over 4.35 million square feet of employment space. It will provide an opportunity to make a significant positive long-term contribution to the local economy and current and future employment prospects within the borough and the wider North Northants area, generating over 7,000 jobs in its operational phase, and to balance the need for employment against housing growth already consented in the borough. The development is brought forward by Mulberry Developments, who have experience of delivering large-scale B8 logistics schemes, as evidenced by Midlands Logistics Park off of Geddington Road, which is now fully let. I will now hand over to my colleague Fajana Mazumdar, who will take you through the next part of the presentation, starting with the site location.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair and everyone. So from this site, we can see the aerial view of the proposed site. You can see the southern part of the site includes an area of woodland. Other than this, the site is mostly covered in grass and enclosed by hedgerows and conifers. Industrial and commercial use surrounds the site from north and west. A disused quarry and a landfill site also adjoins the site to the eastern side. Stanion village is located to the south beyond Brigstock Road. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the application is for outline permission with all matters reserved. This slide shows the indicative layout of proposed development. All buildings will be accessed from Stamford Road via a new proposed roundabout. The existing access to the north will be retained as an additional access. Moving on to the next slide. Next slide, please. So this is the parameters plan, which shows that the proposed scheme is divided into 4 zones. Zone 2 and 3 consist 2 subzones each. All matters have been reserved, therefore layout is subject to change. However, you will know the conditions lead certain aspects to be continued through to reserved matter stage. Next slide, please. This slide shows the details of the proposed scheme. The proposal is for use class B1, B2, and B8, and total floor space proposed is 404,100 square meter. Next slide, please. Some photographs have been taken in and around the site. So this one is showing existing access of Stamford Road North. Next slide, please. This is the existing site access looking into the site. Next slide, please. This photograph has been taken from within the site looking to the west. Next slide, please. This is the view looking to the east. Next slide, please. This is the view to the north, where you can see the glimpse of industrial buildings of Max Park Industrial Estate. Next slide, please. Next, thanks. In terms of representations, 2 rounds of consultation have been carried out. Local Planning Authority have received 93 letters of objection at the first round and 103 letters at the second round. Additional representations have been summarized in 2 addenda reports. Moreover, its Northamptonshire Council, Parish Councils, and Northamptonshire Joint Planning Unit also provided their representations. The main area of concerns are related to transport issues, landscape and environmental issues, and conformity with development plan. You'll know that officers have responded to the raised concerns in the main report and 2 addenda reports. Next slide, please. So these are the key determining issues for this application and will be further discussed in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please. In terms of principle of development, the subject site is unallocated within the development plan. The proposed schemes accords with some policies, but not others. It should be noted that the joint core strategy suggests proposals that deliver jobs, growth, and economic prosperity will be considered positively, and such proposals on unallocated sites may come forward for development. My colleague will elaborate further later in his presentation how officers have reached into planning balance, taking into account all the material considerations. Extensive consultation has been carried out with Natural England soil expert team to identify the agricultural land classification. They have confirmed that the land is unlikely to contain significant areas of best and most versatile agricultural land. Next slide, please. So this application is an EIA application as the site area exceeds 5 hectares. Assessments of these elements included within the environmental statement. Next slide, please. In terms of landscape and visual amenity, concerns were raised initially by the place shaping services of County Council. A landscape visual impact appraisal and a landscape strategy and design code have been submitted to address those concerns. Officers consider key objectives in terms of landscape strategy at this stage is acceptable. Next slide, please. Sorry, go back to the previous slide, please. In terms of ecology and biodiversity, concerns have been raised for dormouse and great crested newts. Condition 14 and 15 are imposed to ensure minimum impact. In addition, conditions requiring biodiversity monitoring scheme, construction environment management plan, and the landscape and ecological plan also been imposed. My colleague, Edward, will present that from the next slide. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Fazana. Madam Chair, members of the committee, good evening. My presentation is going to deal with the items that are set out firstly on this slide. Now, this site is strategic. At the moment, it's unallocated. The existing strategic sites that are cited here are GEFCO on the Geddington Road, Midland Logistics Park, Rockingham Enterprise Area, and Manton Park, Cockerell Road. The application proposal will result in significant socioeconomic benefits to the local authority. There will be a broad range of job opportunities, but fundamental to this is the investment that the applicant will make to the local area. Associated with the investment or aligned with it would be infrastructure investments as well to ensure that the site is sustainable and has a high degree of connectivity. Next slide, please. There were a number of objections that raised concerns on highways grounds, and the applicant engaged with the local highways authority as well as the development management team of the local planning authority in order to seek to address the issues raised by objectors. The applicant is proposing to provide bus stops within the site, combined cycle and footways to the western edge of the site. The local highways authority listed 16 specific junctions for the applicant to consider under a manage and monitor approach to address any adverse issues as a result of this proposal and to mitigate them. The manage and monitor approach has been captured in the conditions associated with the recommendation. Conditions 17 to 24 are drawn to members' attention, as well as addendum 2 report, which deals with the section 106 issues and the approach that the local authority will be taking. The site is in flood zone 1. Harper's Brook runs 200 meters south of the site. Willowbrook approximately 500 meters north of the site. The applicant undertook a flood risk assessment, and that's Appendix 11.1 of the applicant's environmental statement. Next slide, please. The applicant also undertook a noise survey and a noise assessment. Officers of the local planning authority, the environmental health officers, raised no objections to the findings of those reports and surveys. And furthermore, the local planning authority will be imposing a noise control condition, condition 34. Air quality assessment was also undertaken by the applicant in accordance with the air quality management technical guidance that the local planning authority depends on and refers to in such applications. No objections again were raised by the environmental health officer. There will be a construction and environmental management plan, and that is set out in a respective condition as well. Next slide, please. Now, it's important, Madam Chair, that we come to the material considerations of the application. The application has conformity with key elements of the development plan. In part, it also doesn't conform with certain policies, but that's not unusual. What is important to note, Madam Chair, is that the proposal does not lead to a distortion of the development plan. And fundamentally, the development plan and material considerations have been considered in the planning balance of the officer's report. And I will draw your attention, Madam Chair, to paragraph 8.89 of the officer's report. Fundamental to the officer's assessment has been section 38.6, and that is that the development is in accordance with the development plan, and that there are no considerations that indicate that it isn't otherwise. Overall, officers have considered the planning balance carefully and considered that some compliance with some parts of the development plan occur, but where they don't occur, we account for that and we make note of that. But on balance, it's considered that the material considerations outweigh any disadvantage, adverse impact that the scheme may result in. There is conformity with the development plan and the recommendation is for approval. Fundamental to the officer's assessment has been full cognizance paid to paragraph 80 of the National Planning Policy Framework and policies 23 and 24 and 22 of the development plan. Next slide, please. The recommendation is subject to delegated authority and being given to the head of planning and environmental services to determine the application subject to the conditions set out in the officer's report and the satisfactory completion of a section 106 agreement, and also the basis of the heads of terms are set out in the second addendum report that form part of the overall package of submissions by officers to you as members. I would like to hand over to my colleague Ian Smith to basically draw some conclusions on what both Vajana and myself have said in our brief presentation. Ian.
Thank you, Edward. So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, in conclusion, reference to Appendix A of the report confirms that the majority of statutory consultees have no objections to the application, subject to appropriate conditions. Highways England have removed their previous concerns, and Northamptonshire County Council Highways have agreed a monitor and manage approach to mitigating transport impacts from each phase of the scheme secured by condition. With respect to objections and concerns relating to policy by local Northamptonshire Council and the North Northants Joint Policy Unit, officers have scrutinised the relevant plan policies and are of the opinion on balance that there is general conformity with the plan as a whole. And where there are areas of conflict, we have secured suitable mitigation via planning conditions or Section 106 obligations. Members of the committee tonight have the enviable opportunity to approve development that will enable this authority, with due reference to planning policy and highway requirements, to fulfil its long-standing strategy of regenerating Corby through growth and its ambition of doubling the size of Corby. With the advent of the new unitary authority, that opportunity is very unlikely to be presented again. So, moving to the recommendation, Chair, which is for approval. The recommendation is to approve, subject to delegated authority being given to the Head of Planning and Environmental Services to determine the application, subject to the conditions set out in the report and satisfactory completion of a Section 106 agreement on the basis of the heads of terms set out in the second addendum report. Thank you, Chair. That ends the officer's presentation.
Thank you. I will now hear the speakers. How we have decided this, we have 7 objectors, so I will give them 3 minutes each, and 10 minutes between the agent and the applicant, so that to try and make sure that everything is equal. The very first speaker I would invite to speak is Mr. Reid, please. You have 3 minutes from when you start to speak.
Hello, thanks for letting me talk. My main concerns, apart from the impact on environment, is more to do with the traffic and quality of life in people surrounding the villages. Even now, without this, it's not pleasant coming into and out of Stanion, particularly walking or cycling. The footpaths that have been provided on the new development are not complete. They're fragmented. For example, leaving Stanion, there is no footpath or no traffic lights to get across the Stamford Road. The footpath is on the right-hand side, the eastern side of Stamford Road. The traffic lights have been removed opposite the Holiday Inn Express Hotel or the Holiday Inn. So therefore, walking or cycling up to the Holiday Inn and into the Asda through Geddington Road on peak areas is dangerous. You have to take your life in your hands to cross a 3-lane unregulated traffic junction. This will make further impact. There'll be more vehicles along the A6116. We have a 40-mile-an-hour zone through the 6166 at Stanion. It's unmonitored, unpoliced. Again, if for the 106 agreement, there could be measures to improve this, either traffic lights, traffic calming, rumble strips, some sort of protection for motor vehicle users leaving and entering Stanion, particularly walkers and cyclists. We sell the area as, oh, it's great for walking and cycling. We develop houses, there's great walking and cycling paths, but there isn't. For example, we have to get across to Little Stanion using the traffic lights, then there is no footpath up to the Holiday Inn on either side. So if we could have a real consideration about the impact this is having on people in the area, and so we don't reduce their quality of life even more, because it's certainly, we have had a reduction of our quality of life. It is not pleasant leaving or entering Stanion at peak times. And to be honest, it stops people going out. So that's my main concern, is that we have a real good thought about the 106 and provide good infrastructure for the parishioners should this development go ahead. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Mr. Wishart, please. You have 3 minutes from when you start to speak.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of East Northants Council, and also thank you for the adjournment last week, which was very sensible. Our objections remain strong, and in highways terms are actually now stronger than they were before. Firstly, on the point of policy and principle of development, we agree with CBC's own policy colleagues that the proposals are not supported in planning policy terms. They remain a significant departure from our joint core strategy, and they will disrupt and distort the delivery of jobs within the North Northants district. ENC is not against the delivery of jobs in principle, but not at all costs, which is how it appears to us. We remain concerned about flooding and water pollution, and we're also concerned that noise and air quality impacts outside of CBC's district have not been addressed sufficiently. On highway matters, and having now seen the report, ENC's objections are now stronger than before. We note from the report that the applicant did insufficient work at the scoping stage, paragraph 5.91. They've also consistently failed to undertake adequate survey during the application stage, and they're refusing to do any more. This is just not acceptable by them at all. We do appreciate that the local highway authority are trying to be pragmatic with a manage and monitor approach, but it's just not good enough. The applicant should have done the work earlier. The manage and monitor approach accepts the principle of development and will only kick the problem of survey work further down the road for our new unitary council to resolve. It weakens the council's negotiating position considerably. ENC is even more concerned, having seen that there's absolutely no mitigation proposed for the A6116 between Stanyon and Thrapston, except at the roundabouts at either end, the A14 and Stanyon. We share the concerns raised by the many parishes along this route, the route which has not been surveyed. It would be unreasonable to grant permission without knowing what the impacts would be and what mitigation is required. We're just not in that position at the moment. In conclusion, East Northants does not dispute the provision of jobs in principle, but it does seem to be the only matter being given significant weight. All the main impacts, or the majority of them at least, seem to be on residents of East Northants, particularly along that route on the A6116. So we recommend refusal as set out in our letter and report. But if the committee is minded to support the application, we would ask the ENC as party to any discussions over highway conditions and section 106 heads of terms. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking to your time, both of you. Could I ask Mrs. Innes to speak, please?
Thank you very much. On behalf of the parish councils along this A6116, I'd like to say the following. The site for this proposal is unsuitable, being a mix of farmland and woodland of high biodiversity value. Corby already has many large vacant units and is on track to meet its JCS minimum jobs target. This development would have a negative impact on the countryside between Corby and Thrapston, and the 12,000 or so people who live along that and work there would be very impacted. Current levels of noise and air pollution on the 6116 are unacceptable. Traffic generated by this development would inevitably make it even worse. Please remember, we are all council taxpayers and that local authorities are expected to play a big role in delivering emission reductions, particularly in transport. Be in no doubt about the strategic importance of the 6116 to Corby. I refer you to the email from NCC's Cabinet Member for Highways, which we did send a copy. He said the 6116 was rebuilt to form a primary route to Corby and that it would be, quote, unacceptable to direct traffic from junction 12 to 7 of the A14 and then along the A43, particularly as junction 7 and the A43 around Kettering is currently congested at peak times, unquote. This highlights the unacceptability of the A43 as the principal access route between the A14 and this development. Yet when addressing the likely impact on the local highway network, the applicant's focus is almost exclusively on the A43, with virtually no mention of the 6116, despite it being the main route between the site and the A14. Other major concerns about the adequacy of the 6116 include the mini roundabouts at Islip and junction 12 of the A14, which even now are unsuitable. HGVs frequently struggle to maneuver around them, causing damage as well as additional risk to other road users. The proposed large warehouses would more than likely be distribution centres, which would generate huge numbers of HGV movements day and night, mainly along the 6116. It is projected that up to 7,000 people would be employed, further increasing the traffic using the road. They could not cope with this extra traffic, and daily life would become even more stressful for the local people. Although NCC Highways were persuaded to withdraw their objection on the basis that they would adopt a monitor and manage approach, East Northamptonshire Council have been extremely critical of that approach. We entirely agree with them. A monitor and manage approach is completely reactive. The cost to the taxpayer and the disruption of any mitigation measures required as a consequence have not been assessed in any way. Whilst Corby's planning officer is recommending approval, subject to conditions covering large areas of missing information, we agree with the NC that the correct course of action is a refusal on the grounds of insufficient information. If you're unwilling to refuse the application, a deferral pending receipt of necessary information before making a decision should be agreed. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Could I have Councillor Brackenbury, please? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm the County Councillor representing the Thrapston Division, which includes a number of villages along the A6116 and the town of Thrapston, situated off the A14. This application, as you've heard, is of a significant scale, over 404,000 square metres of B1, B2 and B8 floor space on an unallocated greenfield site. It is poorly connected to the urban area and is situated adjacent to woodland of high biodiversity value. The A6116 will be a key access route south towards the A14. If granted, this application will have a significant negative impact on communities along the A6116. These communities are rightly very concerned about the safety over additional HGV and general traffic on the road should the application be approved. Well, this will not only impact on Stanion, Brigstock, Sudborough, Lowick, Islip, Old Winkle and Thrapston, but the many farm dwellings situated along the route. Work has not been done to show the impact on the junction along the A6116, and the impact on the A14 junction has not been properly modelled. The traffic and highway studies are insufficient to inform a decision. The highway infrastructure is not sufficient to deal with the increase in traffic to and from this site. Northamptonshire Highways Authority have requested a traffic count for junction 12 of the A14. This has not been submitted. With the current coronavirus pandemic, any traffic surveys and highway studies done during this time will be unreliable. The number of pre-commencement and compliance conditions recommended by your officers show how poorly thought out this application is. I urge you to refuse this application. The proposal conflicts with a number of policies of the adopted joint core strategy, a number of which have been highlighted by your policy team response to the consultation. Policy 3 refers to landscape character. Policy 19, the delivery of green infrastructure. Policy 24, logistics. You have a number of material planning reasons to refuse this application, and I urge you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I now call on Mr. Horseman, Chris Horseman?
Good evening. What does the Borough Council's note paper say? Have you read it? It says working together to deliver pride in Corby. Does building a field full of sheds next to our busiest roundabout make people think we're proud of Corby? Of course not. By all means, build more sheds, create more jobs, create economic growth, but not on this site, for goodness sake. As a committee, do you ever think to put residents first? In the key determining issues put forward by that lady, the word residents was not mentioned once. Do you ever think that parish councils ought to be heard and considered? Because if so, it's not very apparent. It's also about time you as a council made a seismic change in how you look at planning and put residents rather than business first. Without people, you don't have a town to be proud of. Residents don't want road congestion and a disruption to their way of life. Without toilet facilities and park-up places at Cowthick Plantation, lorry drivers will no doubt use Longcroft Road in Little Stanion along with the drivers at the Euro Hub. More trash by the roadside, including human excrement. We don't want that, thank you. Now, more than 200 objectors, including Northants and every nearby parish, have said no. We are the first tier of local government. Please remember that. We have a right to be listened to for once. Don't just push it aside because it seems all your concerns are with the functional stuff, the drainage, the highways, flood risks, and the like. And of course, they're important. But what about the detrimental effect to the quality of life of the people who pay your salaries and allowances? This question never seems to feature. Would you want this development in Cottingham, Madam Chair? Would any of you like this close to your homes? Is that why it's near us, not you? If you vote in favour, it will be hard for residents to think you care. Our determination will not cease, whoever the Secretary of State for Housing is. Please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. It's now Mr. Heelan.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening.
It would appear to a reasonable person that for a developer to submit an outline application with all matters reserved that affects 162 hectares of greenfield land, and where that application carries with it very many serious local and national strategic implications for people and the environment in which they live, as to be completely outrageous. This proposal is a Trojan horse. Outline planning seeks to impede discussion of the imponderable facts and to disguise the lack of evidence regarding many aspects of this submission. Promises abound to tempt the unwary, with visions of employment growth, economic growth, and income for local government. But how much of this is reality? How much will actually be delivered? And how much will remain a long forgotten dream, such as the bimodal element of the newly opened MLP, promised but not delivered? How much of what is contained in the glossy brochure supporting this current proposal will meet the same fate? Avoiding at the outset the constraints of detailed scrutiny is crucial to the success of this application, because in the detail lies the devil. It is where facts must support assertions and where intense and detailed scrutiny can be rigorously applied. The developer has a long-term plan and clever tactics in support of that plan's success. The developer will not be diverting from or diluting the aims and ambitions of that plan. Not so, it seems, with Corby Planning Department. Despite the NNJCS being the adopted plan, and although the Cowthick plantation site was considered and rejected during the plan development process, planning officers have chosen to ignore the mountain of objections, including those from the local plan section, and recommend the DCC to approve this application, and more astonishingly, to request the DCC to delegate authority for the approval of all reserved matters to head of planning, thereby removing any further debate. I believe that such actions will only serve to seriously undermine voter confidence in the decision-making of this committee. Do not be beguiled by promises, brochures, and expectations. These are but distractions and all carry some form of codicil, modifying the promise with projected, probably, and possible. The application has but one aim, and that is to achieve planning consent in principle now, and to convince this committee that it is the decision they should make. But that approval would be to deny the many other serious, considered, and relevant objections regarding this application.
Can you wind up now, please?
Yeah, they resonate strongly because they are the sincere and heartfelt voice of the very people who will suffer a great and permanent detriment if your decision tonight is to support this outline application. And so, for all the reasons stated, I most strongly urge the members of the Development Control Committee to refuse this outrageous application. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Page, please. Do we have?
Hold on, Mr. Page. We've got to unmute you. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Page, apologies.
Just one moment, please. Okay, I'm ready. CBC declared a climate emergency in August 2019 and have a written and new strategy document. I've seen no mention of that in this application or in the officer's report. So how are you getting this developer to commit wholeheartedly to your strategy? You will hear advice that BREEAM Very Good is compliant. It is widely accepted, though, that current building regulations, Part L, completely fail to address the climate emergency. And it is for authorities like CBC to seize the initiative, demand and drive the badly needed change yourselves. If members are not aware of that, don't you think it should have been brought to your attention for such a significant project? I refer to LETI Climate Emergency Design Guide, published this year, which takes a holistic view incorporating the wider infrastructure. Their mission statement includes to engage with stakeholders to develop a robust and rapid energy reduction approach, and to work with authorities like yourselves to create practicable policy alterations to ensure the regulatory system is fit for purpose. Surely a project of this scale is a huge opportunity for CBC to become a national leader in addressing the climate emergency, at the same time securing significant 106 contributions to turn that into reality, particularly with what is likely to happen to central funding due to the pandemic. As members, you want to make the right decision for all of us. This proposal is rushed, muddled, and incomplete. You are being asked to make hugely important and far-reaching decision-making without coherent and robust strategies to secure infrastructure improvements, coordinated travel planning, and environmental safeguards. As it stands, once outline consent is granted, CBC are opening the door to the developer arguing that any off-site improvement is not directly attributable to this development. Then the years of grief trying to get central and regional government to fund this out of taxpayers' money, and no certainty this will ever come to pass. You will also miss the opportunity for a strategic transport plan. The rail depot, considered at the same outline stage for Midlands Logistics Park, was discounted because the development was too small. This one is almost twice the size. Now think, if your declared ambition was actually to reduce lorry and car traffic for this area, and a formal commitment from the developer was going to do that, don't you think you'd get a different response from us? Why do you want to miss all these opportunities to have something amazing by rushing this through now? Show us that the climate emergency means something. Listen to the other agencies, work with them to get the best answers for the voters in Corby, their neighbours, and the wider area.
Can you wind up now, please?
I will. Instead of turning Corby into a lorry park, you could be remembered as the people who rejected this application for its lack of ambition and vision, because you want to do the right thing for all of us and do your bit to achieve the carbon neutral future we desperately need for the long-term survival of our planet.
Thank you. I now call upon Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones and Mr. Hutchinson, you have 10 minutes between you. It's up to you how you choose to do this.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your time. My name is Phil Jones, Managing Director of Mulberry Developments. I'd like to start by talking about the success of the Midlands Logistics Park scheme, the benefits it has brought to Corby, and therefore why we believe the Southwick site is a fantastic opportunity for the town to create a substantial number of new jobs across a mix of skills ranges, as well as the positive ripple effect it will have on the local economy. This would reinforce Corby's position as the UK's second fastest growing council area and counterbalance the planned housing growth. MLP has proven a huge success, attracting more occupiers in the larger unit size range than any other scheme in the Midlands since 2018, and establishing Corby as a leading location for large-scale logistics. The site is now home to blue-chip companies Eddie Stobart, Bosch Siemens, and Europa Worldwide, serving contracts with the NHS for the National COVID Resilience Centre, as well as Majestic and Naked Wines. Only the last Gateway site is still to be completed, with construction due to start in the next 2 months and a purchaser ready to take the completed building. The build period will be 9 months, and then MLP will be 100% developed out. MLP will have created over 2,500 jobs once fully occupied, but these jobs are not only those that are typically associated with warehousing. Across the 3 buildings, there are roles in customer service, recruitment, HR, engineering, IT, catering, as well as the associated management roles, to name but a few. The development has already had a positive impact on the wider local economy, with the neighbouring Holiday Inn reporting fantastic sales as a direct result of MLP, triggering a £250,000 refurb of its premises. This is just one example and something you'd expect to see more of as the site matures and if Southwick comes online. Financially, business rates from MLP alone will be 4.6 million per annum on completion of the final unit. Corby, and more specifically its east side, is now well and truly on the map as a leading logistics location, primarily because of its growth plans and available labour, as well as its proximity to the strategic road network. E-commerce continues to grow exponentially, and as such, there is significant demand for more large buildings, which the existing and allocated employment sites in Corby simply cannot accommodate. The subject site is the obvious choice to fill this void now MLP has been fully developed out. In fact, we've already agreed a position with one of the world's largest global blue chip logistics companies to make the application site in Corby home for at least 1.6 million square feet if you resolve to grant permission tonight. This in itself is an incredible opportunity. Construction is planned to commence as soon as possible following the necessary permissions. The Southwick site itself was formerly quarried by British Steel and has been largely dormant for years due to its poor agricultural properties, making it unviable for farming. The site is immediately to the southeast of the commercial fringe in the A43. It's bounded and screened to the south by mature woodland and to the east by a tall mounded landfill site. We believe the site is a logical extension to MLP to meet the underlying demand for space and deliver many more jobs and wider economic prosperity to the area. This is needed more than ever as we enter the deepest recession in generations, which is set to get worse before it gets better. The scheme provides Corby jobs for Corby people. These jobs will protect the livelihoods of residents and keep them working in Corby, improving their economic prospects, improving self-containment for the town and reducing out commuting. It will also encourage further inward investment. Objections raised have been principally in relation to the highway capacity along the A6116 link road and its interface with the villages along this corridor. County Highways assessed this corridor and concluded that sufficient capacity will remain following this and other committed development, and this is supported by our own assessments. Finally, to counter Mr. Wishard's claim, we have not refused to do anything that has been asked of us by County Highways. Rather, we have fully complied with their requests throughout and reached an agreed position. Monitor and manage as a strategy is becoming more commonplace across the country in order to address real traffic generation rather than theoretical. Also, for clarity, any mitigation required from monitor and manage would be funded by the applicant, not the taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm the applicant's planning advisor, David Hutchison, and we've been working with your officers for over 1.5 years, and together we've resolved the important policy and technical issues. This is an application which is of major importance to the people of Corby, and we welcome the officer's recommendation for approval. Insofar as economic context is concerned, the MPPF at paragraph 80 states that policies and decisions should help create conditions in which business can invest, expand and adapt. It goes on to say that significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity. Now, I never thought that the guidance that I've just referred to would be more pertinent than the day that it was written as we struggled through the credit crunch, but I was wrong. You don't need me to tell you about the current severe economic downturn that's been caused by COVID-19, in addition to the obvious tragic human cost. But as we look into an uncertain future, it's vitally important the planning system does all that it can now to aid economic recovery, ensure the right planning permissions are in place for business, and deliver jobs and economic prosperity. The opportunity to capture major new investment and jobs could not have come at a better time for Corby, and it comes with a major global logistics occupier already lined up, ready to occupy 1.6 million square foot immediately. If approved, this is a scheme that would deliver a short-term boost in terms of construction jobs. There would also be up to 7,000 long-term jobs with a range of skill levels. I'm sure neighbouring authorities are envious of the opportunity that's in front of you, and it's unsurprising that we have one here tonight with highways objections that are not even supported by the relevant statutory consultees. As for the principle of the development, the core strategy recognises the significant challenges in attracting new employment to the area. It makes specific reference to the difficulties that are facing Corby in the past with job losses in manufacturing. In response, the core strategy in particular places emphasis on attracting logistics development through Policy 24. And the core strategy takes a flexible approach, and while some sites have been allocated, paragraph 816 makes it clear that the list of sites is not exhaustive, and proposals that deliver job growth and economic prosperity will be positively considered subject to compliance with the plan. So growth towns like Corby are to be the focus for economic development, see your policy 11. It is therefore the right development in the right location and at the right time. As for the technical matters, the application is supported by a robust environmental impact assessment, including a transport assessment. It's not unusual to have local concerns about traffic. It's obviously an emotive issue, but we've presented all the necessary evidence and modelling to the relevant statutory consultees, and they're satisfied. County Council, Highways have, following forensic analysis, raised no objection subject to conditions. Highways England came late to the application and they scrutinised it all over again. They similarly raised no objections. That's because the developer will deliver staged road improvements and other mitigation measures if they're required to facilitate the phased development of the site. There is no evidence to suggest that the County Council and Highways England are wrong. As for design, layout and landscaping, similar to the MLP site, this is a site that will be screened in most directions by existing and proposed landscaping, and future reserve matter applications will have to accord with the outline parameter plan, which will guide the design, layout and landscaping of the site, and it will also place clear limits on the scale of the buildings. Those reserve matter applications will obviously need to come before you for consideration and approval. So to conclude, this is a scheme that offers substantial benefits for the people of Corby. The adverse impacts have been moderated and suitably mitigated. It accords with the development plan when it's read as a whole. And as Mr. Jones says, this is a once in a generation opportunity for Corby, and I respectfully urge members to seize that opportunity and grant plan permission in accordance with your officer's recommendation. If I could just pick up very briefly on some of the other points that have been raised. Obviously, the issue of compliance with the development plan, I think officers have made it very clear in their presentation and the second addendum that this is a scheme that accords with the development plan when read as a whole. As for highways, the approach that's been taken is one which provides more scrutiny, not less, because it will ensure that the mitigation is in place before the staged development of the site proceeds. Highways England is satisfied, the County Council is satisfied, and whilst reference has been raised to the A6116, this is something which has also been deemed to be satisfactory to the County Council. Now, Mr. Page also refers to the climate emergency, and that's something that I don't deal with lightly. Corby is one of the most self-contained settlements in the area, and this is an opportunity to provide jobs where homes are also being provided. If you're to reject this proposal, there's no guarantee that this will come back to Corby. It may go elsewhere, and that will force people to travel even further, adding to those climate change concerns. And finally, on the matter of pre-commencement conditions, this is obviously a very major development, and in my experience, it's not unusual to have a number of pre-commencement conditions as set out in the officer's recommended report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes all the speakers. So if any of the councillors wish to ask questions, could you please use your blue hand by clicking on the participants in the blue hand at the bottom. Paul and I will try to monitor this, but bear with us because we are on 2 screens.
Councillor Addison, Chair.
Councillor Addison.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened very carefully to all that's been said tonight, and yes, I do have concerns when it comes to the traffic, especially along the A6116. A recent development at Rushton Lakes, we must learn from that with their traffic management. Is there any way that we can put pressure on Highways England to put some restriction on, sorry, I don't know what the junction number is at Thrapston, to stop HGV lorries coming along the 6116? And my other question was to do with the triple SI and how we can guarantee that there won't be any environmental impact on that site.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Addison. Who is going to come back on this? Is it Edward or? I think he needs unmuting.
Okay, Edward.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Addison. Yes, you raise a very important point. I think it's, if I could answer in reverse, deal with the triple SI firstly. The site is not going to encroach on the plantation. It's going to be in an area that in the officer's report, we refer to the morphology of the site. You know, it is effectively what you might call an area that is in the urban fringe. It's on the edge of the town. And then you've also got to consider the surrounding historical uses and the fact that the land that the site is going to occupy is in the majority man-made, you know, it's made up land. So I hope that alleviates your fear with regards to any encroachment. There will be positive and proactive intentions on the officers to ensure that there is increased net biodiversity, both within the site and also in terms of connections with the surrounding area, the woodlands and so on. But that will be worked out at the reserve matters stage when the details come forward. With regards to pressure being placed on Highways England, unfortunately, Councillor Addison, we look to the local highways authority to aid us in terms of addressing any mitigation problems associated with transport and connectivity and mitigations to do with the free flow of traffic. So the statutory consultee we would look to, if you like, to exercise that pressure would be the local highways authority. And that local highways authority is fully cognizant of some of those concerns. And that's why conditions 17 to 24, the manager monitor approach, has been offered to the applicant and to us also as development management officers as the only way forward. Now, the manage and monitor approach will mean that the development will be phased. It will come in 4 phases. Now, zone 1, the applicant will be required to carry out live studies. And obviously the studies, the results that come out of that study and the mitigations required will inform the development for zone 2 and so on. So I hope that answers your question. And I think it's important to note, Councillor Addison, that with the reserve matters application, it will all be in the public domain. So it may well be, again, given the level of objections, that the reserve matters application may have to come to committee where the full facts and the issues are tabled for members to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Did that address your concerns, Councillor Addison? Thank you. Do I have anyone else?
Before moving to Councillor Watts, I think my other planning colleague wanted to come in.
Fine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the question of SSI, I would like to inform you that Natural England have recorded the SSI as a landfill site after a survey taken on 2002 and 2007. So it's no longer recorded as a site of special scientific interest. And on a question of Mr. Page on climate strategy has been undertaken or not, I would like to inform you that the environmental statements submitted by the applicant have in chapter 14 taken a full assessment of climate change, and our environmental health officers have undertaken their assessment and have not raised any objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Fidel.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Watts, I think, wants to.
Councillor Watts.
Thank you. I don't know how this internet connection is. It doesn't seem. I understand that this site is a grotty looking site on the corner of a road, which could be far better than it is now. But I'm also aware that Corby seems to impose itself on the villages around, not in the most neighbourly way. My really only concern is about the traffic on that 6116. And if we could do something with prohibiting what can come down that road, then I personally don't see a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions for the officers?
Councillor Kevin Watt, Chair.
Councillor Kevin? Councillor Watt?
Yeah, so I listened to the objectors intently, and I understand their concerns about the traffic. Just a question, what is the percentage increase in traffic predicted along the 6116? I saw from the report that it's 857 two-way movements to the site, but how much of that would take place along the 6116? With the monitor and manage approach, so I understand that as the phase development continues, it would assess the impact on each junction and take mitigating action through Section 106 money contributions to improve those junctions, because obviously the villagers along this route, their access and egress from the villages could be affected, and unless proper action is taken, and it would seem that monitor and manage would assess the actual impact there and then, rather than having a study that took place 6 months ago, and then there was conditions placed upon the developer to then put in place some measures which in the end may not actually mitigate the effects. Noise, onto noise. What part of the operation would be taking place, in out of hours, for after 10 o'clock, before 6 o'clock? Noise travels at night. Which way is the prevailing wind? Is it away from Stannion? Is it away from Little Stannion? Is it away from Weldon? And will there be active noise monitoring during the construction? Next question. What level of complaints have we had from Stannion and Little Stannion already about Midland Logistics Park? Because that is a bit of an example there. The construction, and it's already in operation. The visual amenity. I do notice when I pass Midland Logistics Park, I can't see much of it. So I would hope that should this development go ahead, that it would be equally invisible to the local landscape. It would disappear behind a bund of trees. And encouraged that there is an intention to increase biodiversity from within the site as well. So as we've been planting up our roundabouts, that the grassy areas within wouldn't just be grass, they could be meadowland as well. And I'm hoping that there would be an increase in trees rather than a decrease in trees, and so nothing of Cowthick will disappear, but the site itself will be planted out. And in water attenuation, the attenuation of water on site so that it does not overwhelm Harper's Brook or Willowbrook at the top. So that's a summary if you got that all down.
That's quite a list. Edward, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I thank you, Madam Chair. I think also our local highways officer is available for some questions and may want to come in specifically to do with the percentage on traffic figures. But let's deal with the noise issue. There is a condition, Councillor Watt, that deals with construction and management. So with regards to noise during the construction phase, that is clearly going to be dealt with. With regards to the operational nature of what is effectively a B12/B8, those activities are fairly self-contained. They don't generate much noise. The applicant has provided various studies to do with noise and vibration, and the environmental health officer of the local authority, the local planning authority, is satisfied that they address those concerns. We will make sure that the heads of terms and the section 106 deals effectively with the question of increased biodiversity, because we're mandated to do that not only by the joint core strategy policy and also the national planning policy framework. So with regards to increased biodiversity, Councillor Watt, it will be more than just a question of trees. We will be looking at both the flora and the fauna, both within and surrounding the site, and the mosaic of habitats that are both within and surrounding the sites. And we will ensure, in conjunction with the ecology officer, who are satisfied that conditions that they've put forward can actually address and deal with on-site increase in biodiversity. So we'll capture all those concerns. With regards to the visual impact of the site, Councillor Watt, it's important to note that the site undulates, I think, to the advantage of the applicant, in that the proposed units will sit almost in a valley. They won't be visible from Stamford Road or any other key vantage points around there. You've got the bank of trees as well. So the site will be taking advantage of the natural formation of the land that's there. Obviously, the applicant, when they get on site and start construction, will create a plateau in order to deal with the drainage and get the datum levels all up and so on. But the site has certain advantages. Again, it's important to note that the plantation will not be encroached upon, and the applicant is going to occupy what is effectively man-made land, and land that has been deemed as to have very poor agricultural value. And as my colleague Fazana has said, has been delisted as a triple SI. Yeah. So I hope that answers your questions, Councillor Watt.
Yes, Ken, do you want to come back to that, Councillor Watt? Just a minute, we have to unmute you.
Yes, sorry, there was one point I forgot to mention. I note the contributions from Michael Reid at Stannion Parish Council and his comments about access from Stannion to Corby, and that is very, very important, the safety of access of Stannion to Corby. So there should be an improvement in that access, cycleways, footpaths, safe access to parts of Corby. So that they would be key to this development if it was approved.
Did you want to come back?
Madam Chair, thank you very much for yielding the floor to me to come back to the important question that Councillor Watt raises. Councillor Watt, I'd like to assure you that I think in my initial presentation, we talked about making sure that we pay due diligence and attention to the fact that the applicant has proactively worked with us to ensure and will ensure through the 106 that there is increased infrastructure investment that deals with both combined cycleways and footpaths. And as I mentioned in my initial presentation, that we want to ensure that the site has good connectivity for the free flow of traffic and also the pedestrians without any impediments on their safety.
Thank you. I think we have Richard Ford, who is our legal representative, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I would also see whether the Highways Officer could deal with the point that Mr. Oteng was referring to on the estimates of traffic and obviously the proportionate amount of traffic on the network. I fully appreciate that the the monitor and manage approach will deal with the traffic that is actually generated on a Grampian phased basis secured by the Section 106. But if the Highways Officer is available to deal with that specific point on what the assessment so far is indicating, I think that would be helpful to finish off that point for Councillor Watt.
Mr. Bond's available, Chair.
Mr. Bond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any numbers in front of me, but I think it is important to note that nothing is agreed in terms of the traffic impacts of this development. The assessment is not agreed. The extent of mitigation is not agreed. That's the whole point of the conditioning that's been imposed, so that we assess the impacts of the development as it progresses. So before phase one actually starts in any way, shape or form, once that quantum is identified, it is fully assessed with a robust assessment, and whatever is necessary to facilitate that in terms of mitigation is secured and implemented appropriately. Then phase two builds upon that in terms of experience of actual traffic generation from the site accordingly, incrementally through the rest of the phases. So in terms of percentage of HGVs, in terms of amount of traffic down the 6116, nothing is agreed. There is no agreed position in that particular respect in terms of precise numbers.
So, Chair, I'll just elaborate on that from my perspective on the Section 106 and the interface with the conditions. So the monitor and manage approach is exactly as the Highways Office has just said, and indeed Mr. Oteng and the presentation team, and indeed the applicant, which is that we have the protection of the highways mitigation works to be precisely worked out at the time of the baseline assessment at the time, having already looked at the likely significant transport effects of the scheme. Obviously that then precise mitigation package can be worked out, finalised and secured pursuant to those Grampian conditions phase by phase. That then has an interplay with the Section 106 agreement, which will provide some security and financial backing for those measures to ensure that they are therefore funded as the applicant has agreed to fund those works in conjunction with the operation of those Grampian conditions. So for that reason, that's why officers are comfortable that the highways mitigation packages, even though they're not yet finalised for the obvious reasons that phase by phase they'll need to be precisely defined and then secured, the mechanisms in the conditions and the Section 106 agreement are clear and enforceable. So I thought I would just explain that whilst I have the opportunity.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Councillor Watts wants to come back in, Chair.
Councillor Watt.
Watts.
Councillor Watts. Sorry, Bridget. Yeah. Oh, hang on, she's still muted. Paul.
Give it a moment.
I got it.
Yeah.
If we was put to pass this through, what is your time scale, gentlemen? That's my question.
Who would like to answer that, please?
Madam Chair, if I could just, the outline, the first condition is to do with the time limit, which is 3 years. But we envisage the applicant will work closely with us and all other parties, and that's principally the local highways authority, in order to encourage them to come forward with the reserve matters application. So our view, Councillor Watt, is that things will be done in tandem. If you are minded to resolve to grant approval subject to the conditions and accepting the officer's recommendation, we would be proactively working with the applicant in order to encourage the reserve matters application. And that will be done in making sure that it's a joined up approach, that we work closely with the local highways authority as well as the applicant to deal with the issues of the manage and monitor conditions. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor Watt.
Chair, Councillor Isles, Mr. Ford wants to come in on that point.
Would you come in, please, Richard?
Yes, if I may. So just to follow that through, so it's, as Mr. Oetting says, condition 1 is the 3-year time limit for the submission of reserve matters. There is then obviously the normal period to then implement the planning permission pursuant to the reserve matters approvals, which is a further 2 years. And then, of course, implementation of the first phase would count for triggering of the consent, and then subsequent phases could then follow on as they are brought forward, of which obviously that is a matter of development programme. So that was just to provide that further level of detail on timescales pursuant to condition 1. How quickly the applicant intends to bring forward the development as a matter of their intentions is obviously a matter for them. Obviously they're looking to bring it forward as swiftly as they can, but that's the position secured by condition, which I think is perfectly normal for a scheme of this type.
Thank you. Councillor Isles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first one is ecology. Now, when you create a habitat, it takes time to evolve. Would they be created before full construction starts, you know, because a habitat does take a long while and to be inhabited by insects and whatever, you know, and I think it could be that there's a condition that they create these habitats before they start construction. My second question is the buildings on site. Can they be made into a proper green environment, you know, energy produced by the buildings, so they don't have to use energy outside, and future-proofed as well, because the government is going to electric vehicles. I take it will be electric lorries, etc. So future-proofing will be charging points, etc. on site, which I think is very important for the future. So if anybody can answer that, please.
Can we go to Fajana, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Councillor. If you look at condition 14 and 15, they are pre-commencement conditions. It says clearly that prior to the commencement of any works, the habitats needs to be located safely to minimize any impacts. And in terms of your second question, which is electric charging points, our highways authority have their requirements. When the reserve matter application comes in, they have their specific requirements, and the applicants are bound to follow that. Thank you.
I think, Chair, I think Ian Smith wants to come in.
Yes, Ian Smith, could you please answer that? Thank you.
Just to come back on the sustainability and future-proofing aspect, there's also conditions within the report, conditions 39 to 41, which deal with the sustainability and energy statement, which will have to be submitted as part of reserve matters and approved. So those sorts of issues would be picked up at that point. And the report also clearly refers to effectively buildings being constructed to BREEAM standards, which also get to address the issues around sustainability and energy usage. So we believe that there is adequate controls by condition within the report to address those future-proofing issues to ensure that the future development is sustainable and effectively makes good use of energy, which would include issues such as electric vehicle charging infrastructure, etc. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment too. I think with the regards to future proofing, I think Councillor Horseman, Parish Councillor Horseman brought up quite a valid point. And in Little Stanion, there's an awful lot of problems with the lorry drivers because there isn't sufficient lorries that deliver to a particular area next to Stanion. There is no toilet facilities, there's no parking facilities. I'm assuming that this will be addressed when we go to the next phase, but this is something that needs addressing so that, you know, even if we had compost toilets put in place, that might help everything.
Councillor, can I come in?
Yes, please, Edward.
Yeah, we will ensure that proper provisions are made for those using the site, within the site, that's the lorry drivers and so on, as we have done with Midland Logistics. And we've worked closely with the Highways Authority, the local Highways Authority, in ensuring that those provisions have been put in place. So we will make sure that this site, which is important for you members to note, is that it's going to be fairly self-contained. So you won't have any, if you like, antisocial behavior by lorry drivers outside of the site, because they will drive into the site, and because the site is self-contained, all their needs will be provided within the site, just as it happens with Midland Logistics, you know. So there is a bit of foresight in terms of what we're going to do to ensure that it's a development that both the local planning authority is proud of, and a development that, if you like, is future-proof, that the provisions are there to make sure that it is sustainable and fully self-contained.
Thank you. Obviously, I meant subject to any approval of planning permission. Anybody else want to have?
Councillor Kevin Watt wants to come back in.
You got another question, Kevin? Please come in.
You know me.
I do.
I wholeheartedly agree, Julie, with your comments about the facilities for lorry drivers. It is across Corby. We're in need of a lorry park. I don't know if the old nursery site would come forward, or this would prompt that nursery site to come forward and provide some kind of lorry park access overnight stay. The real question is on the monitor and manage. Presumably, Highways England, NCC Highways would be monitoring? And should they say, we believe a junction for a village requires a roundabout of a certain size, then the applicant will be obliged to provide what the authorities request?
Do you want to come back on that, Edward?
Councillor, if I could yield to my highways colleague to
yes.
Mr. Bond to give a
Bond.
first respond to that, and then I can fill in if there's anything.
Thank you. Mr. Bond, could you come back on that, please? Do we have Mr. Bond?
Well, he's not muted, so.
Can you hear us, Mr. Bond?
So apologies, I muted myself.
All right.
Too many buttons, new bits
Yes.
of kit. I do apologise, Madam Chair. The whole point of the monitor and manage approach is to ensure that we right size the mitigation to make sure that the appropriate works are secured. So as Councillor quite rightly identified, if a junction requires some form of mitigation, that mitigation will be required. So it all depends on the assessment. The assessment will be tied to the scale of that particular phase, and then subsequent phases will look back on the actual performance of the development in terms of actual traffic generation. The initial phase will be based on the theoretical traffic generation associated with developments of that scale and kind in that sort of location based on national data. The subsequent elements will be based on what that site actually generates in that exact location, because they can use counts for that particular site in terms of actual traffic generation. So we get a more precise idea of the actual impacts. But as the councillor quite rightly points out, if a junction requires some form of modification, then we will look at that, and if that is required, then it will be required in that context. In terms of the whole point of the set of conditions that we are imposing in that context. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on anything, Edward?
No, Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments?
Don't see any blue hands, Chair. Oh, sorry, Mr. Ford wants to come back in.
Mr. Ford.
Hi. I just thought I would draw committee's attention to a procedural point which is of note, which is that we've heard from officers about the conformity with the development plan, and that we've looked carefully at the development plan and looked at policies that were not, the application is not in conformity with, and policies that the application is in conformity with, and worked out that there is general conformity when one reads the plan as a whole. Notwithstanding that, because of the size of the B1A floor space, the employment floor space for B1A, there is a requirement procedurally under the Town and Country Planning Consultation Direction to notify the Secretary of State that we wish to determine this application if we were to determine the application favourably. And therefore there would be a period of 21 days for the Secretary of State to provide any comment in relation to that, which would be prior to actual issuing of a planning permission if there was a recommendation to approve. So I thought I would just flag that as a matter of procedure. It's not considered to be a departure from the plan overall, because of that general conformity analysis that officers have made. But because of the there is accepted to be some non-compliance with one or more of the policies of the plan, then that is the consultation requirement that we have to notify the Secretary of State. So I thought I would flag that now. It's not pertinent to the determination by this committee, but it is a procedural point which I thought members ought to be aware of.
Thank you. I don't think we were aware of that. I appreciate that very much. Any further comments or questions from anyone?
No blue hands, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Right. In that case, I think we will go to a vote.
Madam Chair,
yes.
Madam Chair, there needs to be a mover and a seconder.
Oh,
Obviously.
that does. Absolutely. Sorry about that. It's this Zoom thing. It's just confusing me slightly. I'm forgetting where I am.
Councillor Addison has put her hand up.
Councillor Addison.
Move, Chair.
Do I have a seconder?
Councillor Isles has put his hand up, Chair.
Thank you.
Second, Chair.
Thank you. So we will now go to a vote. Councillor Addison, are you for the recommendation to approve, subject to delegated authority being given to the Head of Planning and Environmental Services to determine the application, subject to the conditions set out in the report and satisfactory completion of a Section 106 agreement on the basis of the heads of terms set out in the second addendum report?
For.
Councillor Brown.
Hang on, I'm just unmuting Councillor Brown. We're trying to.
Councillor Paul Beattie.
For.
Councillor Watt, Kevin Watt.
For.
Councillor Bob Isles.
For.
Councillor Bridget Watts.
You get me 4.
Sorry, I'm trying to work through the list. Councillor Ferguson.
For.
Do we have Councillor Beattie?
Councillor Beattie was for, Madam Chair, I believe.
Right. Have I got all the councillors there?
Councillor
Anthony Davey, I do beg your pardon.
Thank you. Yes.
It's just over 2 screens. It's not that you're
4.
4. Do we have anyone else that I've missed out?
Yourself, Madam Chair.
And myself 4. So the recommendation is approved. Thank you. Thank you for everyone's input tonight. Thank you for the robust questioning and answers. And I think I call the meeting to a close. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good night.
Good night, thank you. Good night.
Yeah. Pauline, do you want to stay online for a moment?
Yeah.
Thank you.